You could survive the blackout and still die from your own toilet. That is not a metaphor. It is documented emergency medicine, and almost nobody preparing for collapse takes it seriously. Picture the moment the grid goes dark. Your generator hums to life. Your rifle is staged by the door. Your windows are covered. Your perimeter is quiet, and you believe you are ready. But 3 days later, everyone inside your home is doubled over, feverish and dehydrated, and the threat that put them there never came through a window or a door. It came up through the pipes. This is the story of the danger nobody stages for, the one that turns a fortress into a hospital ward from the inside. And it starts with a system most Americans never think about until it fails silently beneath their feet. Security experts spend years drilling entry points, sightlines, and armed response, but a house full of capable defenders is worthless if half of them cannot stand without cramping in pain. Sanitation failure does not announce itself with a gunshot. It creeps in through contaminated hands, spoiled water, and waste that never leaves the property. In every documented grid-down event, from hurricane aftermaths to prolonged winter grid failures, the first mass casualty driver was never violence. It was gastrointestinal illness, spreading fast through close quarters, with no clean way to flush it out. That is the quiet collapse hiding behind the loud one everyone prepares for. Most people misunderstand this because modern plumbing has erased the memory of what waste actually is. Flip a handle and the problem disappears, carried off by a system so reliable it feels invisible. That invisibility is the trap. The moment power stops flowing to municipal lift stations, the illusion breaks, and most homeowners have no mental model for what happens next because they have never had to build one. Here is the hidden mechanism nobody explains. Most sewage systems are not driven purely by gravity. In hilly or low-lying areas, wastewater relies on electric lift stations, pumps that push sewage uphill or across long, flat stretches toward treatment plants. When the grid fails and backup generators at those stations run dry, the entire downstream system stalls. Wastewater has nowhere to go, so it backs up through the path of least resistance, which is often your own drain lines. This is called backflow, and it is a documented, well-understood failure mode in municipal engineering, not speculation. Evidence for this exists across decades of infrastructure reports. After extended power outages tied to major storms, utility departments across the country have documented sewage backups directly linked to lift station failures, some lasting for days before emergency pumps could be trucked in. Engineers call it a cascading failure, where one point of weakness in a networked system drags the rest down with it. Your toilet is the last visible node in a very long, very fragile electrical chain. This means continuing to flush a standard toilet past roughly the first 24 hours of a real grid-down event is not neutral. It is an active biohazard risk. Every flush after the system loses pumping capacity either wastes stored water you may need for drinking or, worse, pushes waste back into pipes that can force it up through other drains in the house. The survival implication is blunt. Your toilet becomes a liability the moment the lights go out, and treating it like a functioning appliance during a prolonged outage is one of the fastest ways to turn a home into a contamination zone. The stakes escalate from there because once bacteria have a foothold in an enclosed living space, they multiply exponentially, and that brings us to the actual working solution. The two-bucket system is not folklore. It is a distilled version of dry sanitation principles used in disaster relief camps, off-grid communities, and military field operations for generations. The concept is simple, but the science behind why it works is what most preparedness content skips entirely. You separate liquids from solids. One bucket, often fitted with a toilet seat lid, receives solid waste only, and after each use it is covered with a dry cover material, such as sawdust, agricultural lime, or clumping cat litter. A second, separate container handles liquid waste only, since urine is sterile at the point of excretion and does not need the same containment protocol as feces, though it does need to be managed for smell and safe disposal. The reason separation matters comes down to microbiology and moisture. Bacterial decomposition in odor-producing reactions accelerate dramatically in wet, oxygen-poor environments. Mixing liquids and solids in a single container creates exactly that environment, essentially an anaerobic breeding chamber that produces ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and rapid bacterial growth. Dry cover material does two things at once. It absorbs residual moisture, and it creates a physical barrier that starves airborne bacteria of the surface access they need to spread odor compounds into your living space. This is the same principle behind composting toilets used in remote cabins across the country, just adapted for a fast, low-cost emergency setup. Historical evidence supports this approach beyond survivalist circles. Disaster relief organizations operating in the aftermath of hurricanes and earthquakes have used near-identical bucket-based systems as bridge solutions before full sanitation infrastructure could be restored, specifically because they reduce disease transmission rates in displaced populations. The survival implication for a homeowner is direct. A $10 setup with 2 buckets, lids, and a bag of absorbent material can be the difference between a manageable inconvenience and a household outbreak of dysentery or norovirus. As the outage stretches from days into weeks, the buckets you prepared on day 1 become one of the most quietly important pieces of equipment in the entire house. And that leads to a problem most preparedness plans completely ignore. Waste does not just threaten your health, it threatens your security because it produces signatures, and signatures get noticed. This is the part almost nobody in mainstream preparedness content talks about with any seriousness. Every choice you make in disposing of sanitary waste either conceals your presence or advertises it. In a prolonged grid-down scenario, when neighbors and strangers alike are scanning for signs of who has resources and who does not, smoke and smell are two of the most obvious tells available. Burning trash, including soiled waste materials, produces visible smoke plumes and a distinct odor profile that can travel for a significant distance depending on wind and terrain. To anyone observing from a distance, a consistent smoke signature at a fixed location says one thing clearly: someone is actively living there, actively consuming resources, and actively generating waste, which means they likely have supplies worth taking. This is basic operational security logic borrowed directly from wilderness survival and military doctrine, where signature management, meaning control of smoke, light, sound, and smell, is treated as seriously as physical defense. The hidden science here is about human olfactory pattern recognition. The human nose is remarkably sensitive to the specific compounds associated with human waste and decomposition, compounds like scatol and indole, because evolution wired us to detect disease risk through smell. That means poorly managed waste does not just risk illness inside your home, it creates a detectable signature outside your home that can draw unwanted attention from people who are also struggling and looking for any sign of occupied, resourced shelters. The survival implication is that waste disposal must be treated as a security operation, not a chore. Burying waste at sufficient depth away from water sources and living areas, using sealed containment when burial is not possible, and avoiding open burning of waste materials are not optional refinements, they are core to staying both healthy and unseen. As the crisis extends further, this quiet discipline becomes one of the clearest lines between households that make it through undetected and those that draw pressure they never wanted. That brings us to the resource most people forget is directly connected to sanitation, and that is water. Every gallon used for hygiene is a gallon not available for drinking, and in an extended outage, that trade-off can become life-threatening far faster than most people expect. The average adult needs roughly 1 gallon of drinking water per day just to maintain basic hydration and organ function, and that number climbs under physical stress, heat, or illness. Traditional hygiene habits, full showers, running taps, constant hand washing under flowing water, were built for a world of unlimited pressurized supply. That world disappears the moment the grid does.
Waterless hygiene protocols exist precisely to break that dependency without abandoning cleanliness altogether, because cleanliness is not optional here either. It is the second half of the same defense against illness that the bucket system addresses. The washcloth method, sometimes called a sponge bath, uses a small, measured amount of water, often less than a quart, combined with a washcloth to clean the body section by section, focusing on high bacteria zones like hands, face, underarms, and groin. This dramatically reduces water consumption compared to a shower, while still removing the surface bacteria and oils that contribute to skin infection and odor signature. Antimicrobial or alcohol-based wipes serve a similar function for hand hygiene specifically, which matters enormously given that contaminated hands are the single most common transmission vector for the gastrointestinal illnesses already discussed in relation to sewage backflow. The evidence for prioritizing hand hygiene above almost everything else in a degraded sanitation environment comes straight from basic epidemiology. Public health data consistently shows that fecal-oral transmission, meaning pathogens moving from waste to hands to mouth, is the dominant pathway for outbreaks in disaster and refugee settings where clean water is scarce. This is why relief organizations prioritize hand-washing stations even before they can fully restore plumbing. The survival implication for your household is that a small reserve of hand sanitizer or antimicrobial wipes positioned right next to your bucket system does more to prevent illness than almost any other single item in your preparedness kit, and it costs a fraction of what people spend on gear that looks more impressive but does less real work.
As all of these pieces come together, a larger pattern starts to emerge, one that most preparedness culture gets backwards. The instinct is to spend heavily on defense first, weapons, fortification, surveillance, and to treat sanitation as an afterthought, something you will figure out if it becomes necessary. But every documented case of prolonged infrastructure failure tells the same story in a different order. The households that struggled most were not the ones that faced armed threats. They were the ones incapacitated by illness that could have been prevented with a bucket, some sawdust, and a plan made in advance. Security is not just about who can get into your home. It is about whether the people inside your home can still function after 72 hours without a working sewer line. This is the pattern that deserves far more attention than it gets, because it reframes the entire hierarchy of preparedness. Sanitation is not a secondary concern that ranks below food, water, and defense. It is structurally connected to all three. Poor sanitation contaminates water. Contaminated water causes illness. Illness consumes food and medical resources faster than any external threat, and a household weakened by illness cannot defend itself even if every rifle and every lock is in perfect working order. The infrastructure failure that starts with an electric lift station losing power ends days later as a full-spectrum threat to every layer of your preparedness plan, unless it is interrupted early with simple, deliberate, low-tech intervention.
The final warning here is not about panic, it is about sequence. Most people plan for the dramatic version of collapse, the version with confrontation and defense and visible danger, because that is the version that feels cinematic and urgent. But the systems that actually fail first are the quiet ones, the pipes and pumps that hum along unnoticed until the moment they stop. And the true test of preparedness is not how you handle the danger you can see, it is how you handle the danger that builds silently, in the dark, in the pipes beneath your own floor, while you are watching the door instead. Grid-down survival, blackout preparedness, and home emergency sanitation are not separate categories. They are one continuous system, and the household that understands that sequence, defense second, sanitation first, is the household most likely to still be standing when the lights finally come back on.